A very good day to you all. Welcome. My name is Gordon Simango, and I serve as Director of the Liaison Office to the African Union at the All Africa Conference of Churches. So I am joining you today from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. We deeply appreciate that you could attend this online Pan-African consultation on Africans and Africans in the diaspora, which is scheduled for today and tomorrow. Our session for today will be for 2 hours. We trust you have received the agenda already, and it is exciting to see a wide range of participants from the 5 regions of Africa and from our colleagues in the diaspora. Your Excellencies, the international leadership team of the Africans and Africans in the Diaspora Conference process, the hosting committee and staff in South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, and my brothers and sisters, all protocols observed. The Pan-African Congress of Manchester, United Kingdom of 15 to 21 October 1945 forms part of the spirit of the foundations and basis for today's consultation, which is just but a very significant step towards the Africa and Africans in the Diaspora Conference, which is scheduled for next year in October. Details to this will follow from Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker and Reverend Frank Chikane. Just to say that our program for today, we would have about 4 to 6 speakers. So we would have Reverend Frank Chikane, Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker, taking us through on the processes where we have come from and where we are aiming at. We would also have an address on the diaspora, 6th region of the AU and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. This is going to be presented by a colleague within the African Union Citizens and Diaspora Directorate. Then we would have an address from Professor Bani Pichkana, which is going to look at the several issues and challenges and strategies on how to achieve full emancipation of the continent. And then we would have a response by a panel of 2 people. And then we would have a session where we would have question and answer, comments, reflections, and discussions, and then come to closing the consultation. In terms of IT, today's webinar is live. It is both on Zoom, it is on YouTube, it is on Facebook, and on the website of the Africa Diaspora.org.za. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the ADD website. We welcome that you can revisit the content yourself at a later stage after this consultation. The consultation will run in 2 languages. These are French and English. Most of our panelists will be presenting in English today. We also have a few presentations in French, and there will be simultaneous translation. For you to select the language that you would prefer, if you look at the bottom of the screen now, you would actually see where it says mute stop video participants. Right at the end, you see interpretation. If you click there, you would find 2 languages. Hence, we would request you to select your language of preference there. It's basically English or French. We also urge all of you to post this event on your social media platforms using the Twitter handle #AAD2020. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker of the day, who is Reverend Frank Chikane. Reverend Frank Chikane is a former Director General and Cabinet Secretary during the Mbeki and Montane administrations of the Republic of South Africa. He is currently a chair of the board of Kagiso Tiso Holdings and serves in many other boards. He is an emeritus pastor of the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa, AFM, chair of the board of directors of the AFM Theological College, moderator of the Commission of Churches for International Affairs of the World Council of Churches, He's a member of the advisory committee of the All Africa Conference of Churches on Peace and Security on the African continent, and also serves as one of the 2 conveners of the Africa and Africans Diaspora Pan-African Conference, which is scheduled for 22 to 29 October next year. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Chikane also served as chair of the board of City Power Johannesburg and a member of the following boards. They are many, I won't mention all of them, but part of the boards are the Development Bank of Southern Africa, DBSA, the Housing Trust, the Tebe Investments, the independent, he served also on the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC in South Africa, responsible for the first democratic elections in South Africa. He also served as a special advisor to the Deputy President, Thabo Mbeki, Director General in the Office of the Deputy President, Thabo Mbeki, Deputy Secretary of Cabinet during the presidency of Nelson Mandela, Director General and Secretary of the Cabinet during the presidency of Thabo Mbeki, and managed the transition from President Mondlane to that of President Jacob Zuma. He's a former director of the Institute of Contextual Theology, former deputy president of Soweto Civic Association and deputy president of the United Democratic Front, former general secretary of the South African Council of Churches, a former member of the councils of the University of the North, now Limpopo, and the University of Wits, president of the AFM International. I mean, his career and his profile is really, really long. I think in terms of his studies, I can say that Reverend Chikane holds a diploma in theology, a master's in religious studies, and a master's in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. For his outstanding work, he has also been conferred honorary degrees from many other universities. Reverend Chikane has published 3 books. Without further ado, Reverend Chikane, I would like to give you the time now. So your 5 minutes start now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought we should start with a quote from the speech of Prixley Ka Isaka Seme in 1906. He is regarded as one of the pioneers of the Pan-African movement. He says the giant is awakening from the 4 corners of the earth. Africa's sons who have been proved through fire and sword are marching to the future's golden door, bearing the records of deeds of valor done. I welcome you to the Africa Consultative Conference. The consultation is in preparation for the Global Africa and African Diaspora Conference, which is going to be held in Johannesburg in South Africa from the 22nd to the 29th November. We meet in this consultative conference as Africans from the 5 regions of the continent and the 6th region of our sisters and brothers in the diaspora in terms of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, the AU. In this regard, the presence of the head of the Diaspora Division of the Citizens and Diaspora Directorate, CIDO, of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ms. Ayman Kair, is highly appreciated. We also welcome the co-convener for the 2021 Global Africa and Africa Diaspora Conference, Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith from the United States. She will be speaking to us on behalf of the international leadership team for the 2021 conference. The international leadership team, for your information, consists of representatives from the regions where people of African descent find themselves outside the African continent. The regions are the Caribbeans, Europe, Latin America, North America. We are working hard to reach out to the people of African descent in Asia, particularly in the Middle East. What is going to be unique about this conference and what distinguishes it is that it's not going to be just a conference of African thought leaders on Pan-Africanism, but it is going to be a conference where all the regions where the people of African descent find themselves. We meet on the 75th anniversary of the groundbreaking 1945 Manchester Pan-African Congress that is regarded as, and I quote, a landmark in the history of decolonization. And I quote again, a pacemaking for the decolonization of Africa and in the British Isles. The Pan-African movement text London 1974 has these quotes. At the Manchester Conference, only 3 flags of independent African countries were flown there. That's Ethiopia and Liberia on the African continent and Haiti. Those were the only countries where people of African descent were free. This has remained a heritage of the Charlton Town Hall, All Saints in Manchester. In the hall, you find those flags. Today, all the colonized countries are free, except for 2 of them. One of them is the Sahrawi Republic. But I would like to say the conditions of African people and people of African descent globally still leaves much to be desired. And all indications are that the demon of racism is well and alive in our midst. I'm thus of the view that ours is the empire, a large empire that expresses itself in the form of an unjust national and international governance systems, an unjust economic regime, and the poverty of morality that is informed by subterranean culture of racism. We should bear in mind that the struggle of the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, which was held in 2001, it's still raging as racism globally seems to be on the rise. I would like to say that if the 1945 Manchester Conference, Pan-African Conference, served as a pacemaker of decolonization, our consultative conference today and tomorrow, and the 2021 Johannesburg Pan-African Conference must be a pacemaker for the all-round liberation of Africans and people of African descent globally, as well as leapfrog them to the cutting edge of global economic developments. On the wings, I would like to say, of the 4th Industrial Revolution with the Internet of Things that should assist in leveling the playing field in a way that has never happened before. The African Consultative Conference is the beginning of the regional conferences wherever people of African descent find themselves. We base this on our concept note, and if you don't have that concept note, you can find it in our website, and the action plan agreed upon by the international leadership teams. There would also be commissions that are expected to be constituted to deal with some of the aspects referred to in the concept note. All this and further research and studies are expected to be completed by June to enable next year, to enable the organizers to put the material together which will serve as a basis for the 2021 October conference. Going back to Prixley Kaseme quote, this is a momentous moment which he wished in 1906, and we have just arrived where the people of African descent will march to their freedom. I wish all of you the best for these 2 days. I thank you.
Chair, Reverend Chikane, we deeply, deeply appreciate the wisdom coming from you. Thank you so much for explaining and indicating to us that this conference that we are preparing for next year involves all regions where all peoples of African descent find themselves. And that is very, very important. You highlighted there that when people met in Manchester, then in 1975, there were only 3 flags of independent Africans where you would find people of African descent and in Africa, so Ethiopia, Liberia, and Haiti. And of course, you highlighted that there are only 2 countries that remain to be independent at the present moment. And I think you highlighted the conditions of the African people, which still leaves a lot to be desired, from poverty to racism. Thank you so much. We deeply appreciate your wisdom, Reverend. We would now move on to the next presenter, who is Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker is a Senior Associate for Pan-African and Orthodox Church Engagement at Bread for the World in Washington, D.C. She brings global, national, and local experience as a faith thought leader, as a journalist, as a speaker, and as an author. President Clinton, Senator Richard Lugar, former Indiana Governor, VP Mike Pence, and 2 of her alma maters, Yale Divinity School and Kent State University, have awarded her with high distinctions of leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Angelique received her doctorate degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and is a former executive director, minister of the Church Council in Indianapolis, Indiana. Reverend Angelique is related to the National Baptist Convention, USA. She's a governance member with the World Council of Churches and is president of Historic Black Churches, which is one of the widest represented ecumenical bodies of Christianity in the USA. Reverend Angelique, you have the floor. Your 5 minutes starts now.
First, giving honor to God who stands at the head of my life. All praises and honor unto God. To my amazing co-convener, the Reverend Dr. Frank Chikane. I just don't know how I was so blessed to serve with this iconic person in this amazing work, leading up to the remembrance and the impact and the substance of Manchester 1945. To my mentor, yes, the Reverend Dr. Barney Pitiana, who I am so honored to serve with in this moment. And then to my sister from our amazing African Union. And then to the International Committee of the Manchester Conference and the movement therein from all parts of the world. We say thank you. It's an honor to stand in this moment. To the World Council of Churches, who is such a wonderful partner. To particularly the persons of African and African descent who serve on the Central Committee, of the World Council of Churches who literally envisioned this moment of coming together. It is my honor to recognize your leadership all over the world. It is such an honor to serve you at the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches. To all of those who, like me, stand in this moment, affirming our identity as people of Africa. Yes, the African Union has led the way. Africa is born in us. It may be even stronger to say Africa is reborn in your diaspora and, of course, on the continent. Yes, I have the great joy of bringing greetings from what the African Union calls the sixth region, the sixth area of the African Union. This is such an important aspect of our coming together at the AU. As one who is also a child of the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated, who has served my national church that is predominantly people of African descent as their ecumenical representative and on the Home Mission Board, and also formerly their vice chair. This is one of the largest religious bodies in the United States of people of African descent. It is my joy to greet you as well. On behalf of Bread for the World in Washington, D.C., where we're doing everything we can to fight the policies and practices that would work against the humanity of all of God's children, those who have been undignified because of the ways in which hunger and poverty affect their lives. Yes, as Christians, we have come together globally to say we must address these indignities. My sisters and brothers, this is a critical moment in the diaspora space, coming alongside of our brothers or sisters on the continent of Africa. You already know about George Floyd. You already know about Breonna Taylor. You already know about the series of assaults, injury, horror, and violence against God's people who happen to be of African descent, part of the Pan-African community. And know, to be very clear, not just for 1900s, not for 2000s, not just for 2020, but we go back at least over 400 years in the United States. When we come to this moment, we are painfully reminded that last year was the quadcentennial of the African diaspora in the United States, to remember the ships that brought us over. And yes, from Angola in 1619. Oh, there were many ships that came after, and there were ships that came before, but it was 1619 where we remember how the ship was hijacked by the British and took certain ones from the ship that was actually going further south to the United States to come to the United States instead. And so 1619, which has actually also been commemorated by the U.S. Congress, led by the Congressional Black Caucus to do so on last year, we remember the quadcentennial. We remember that that season, that landmark, takes us into this moment 2020, and yes, will take us into the year 2021 and following relative to our work around Manchester. We are pleased to say that there are representatives in this moment coming from Europe, Canada, Latin America. Yes, that includes Brazil, Colombia, also the Caribbean, also, of course, our beloved Africa and the United States. We are reclaiming our Pan-African kinship. We are reclaiming a future together that always has been, but has not always been a way in which we have intentionally reclaimed and named our space. Now, in the diaspora, this is very important. It is very important that we find this coming together as people of faith and as people who lead in the public, civic, and private sectors. This is an important moment for reclaiming that. As I've mentioned earlier, knowing 2020 and the horrors relative to this moment of people who have died at the hands of police brutality. We know that this is an important moment for seeing where not only in the United States, but all over the world where people have picked up their voices, have gone to the streets saying, we want more. Our dignity must be recognized and embraced. The governments, the people, and all of those who make decisions need to hear us again and again and again. In the United States, we have been in this moment of elections. Yes, a new leader who will be positioned to take us into the future. Even with that said, the polarities, not only in the United States, but in our world, are so deep that not just one leader, but all the people will have to rise to hold accountable each other's humanity. The Manchester movement is one of the ways in which has been carved out to do that amongst our Pan-African family. We are looking forward to being in Johannesburg to mobilize and re-energize this moment together. But until we get to that point, we are able to say consultations like this one today on Africa, it really matters. The good news is, as is appropriate, Africa is leading us in the consultations that will come over this next year. The next one will focus more so on the United States. Yes, Latin America will come. The Caribbean will come. Europe will come. Yes, Canada will come. Will all come in their own way to share their various regional perspectives on this important work. We are grateful that in this moment that the focus on Africa will be shared. I've been very blessed to have lived on the continent and traveled extensively on the continent of Africa. And one of the best things I can say is it's been amazing. It's been amazing to be able to sojourn with my people and to take the lessons learned there to other parts of the world, including to the United States. We are looking forward to this not only being a movement of faith, but a movement of advocacy and of engagement. In this movement, policy matters. In this movement, spirituality, economics, and yes, political will matter. Harkening back to 1945. We know we have seen political gains. Imagine 1945, the eve of the period in which the continent was being envisioned as a place that would not be driven by colonialists who came, many who did not have good intent toward Pan-African peoples. That in 1945, there were leaders who came from the Pan-African space, sat at table. They had been meeting previous to that, but it was 1945 that was so important, that ushered in a season in which colonialism failed. and it was in great part because of Pan-African Agency. But it was 1945. The people came together. Yes, the United States. Yes, the Caribbean. Yes, Europe. Yes, Africa. Yes, from various parts came together. In this moment of the Manchester Conference and the movement up until that moment, we believe there is much to probe, to look at our concept note, to look at our action plan, to look at our calendaring. All of that is available now. We believe this is a moment of a Pan-African Renaissance that goes back specifically to that season. Also in that moment, we know not only the colonialism and the independence movement of the continent of Africa took place from 1945 all the way through to the 90s, but also the civil rights movement happened. In the Caribbean, in all these various places, we saw structures and political change. The question before us now is this emphasis on economy, the economics. Just because the political systems may change doesn't mean the economic system has changed. We know this only so well. Certainly we know it at Bread for the World as we see, and especially in this COVID moment, the increase of hunger and poverty. We know so much of that is related to the fractured economic systems, the global economy, and the national economies, and the local and communal economies. We must reimagine what economy, the okemene, what it means in this moment. That is a focus of what we are doing in this movement. But of course, it's the spiritual. Whatever the expression is, Christian, Muslim, Jew, it just doesn't matter. Whatever the faith perspective is, it must be brought to the table. Because in that is the divine and the divinity, and claiming the divinity of our common humanity that must center and focus our way forward. So this movement and the conference envisioned will be doing that. We are honored, we are delighted that you have decided to accompany us on this journey. Bring others to the table. We're excited. We have a website. We have a lot of other tools to, if you will, fuel this movement. Thank you to my partners. Thank you to my mentors. Thanks to you for joining us in this moment. We're truly looking forward to what the future will bring. God bless you. We give thanks for you. Amen and Ashe.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Angelique, for the wise words from you. You covered quite a lot in what you have said to us today. May I ask dear participants to already begin to engage with us on the chat box. So you have already heard from Reverend Frank Chikane. Now you have heard from Reverend Dr. Angelique. We might not have much time at the end, so I would ask you to post your reflections on the chat box, the questions that you might have on the chat box. We would have a moment at a time when we will be looking at this and throwing this into a plenary discussion. Again, thank you, Reverend Angelique, for looking at what we need to be focusing on now as Africa and Africans in the diaspora, or people of African descent in the diaspora, our identity as Africans and our identity as peoples of African descent. And you actually said there that maybe Africa is being reborn in Africa, maybe Africa is being reborn in the diaspora. So that spirit and kindling it and just moving forward with it, it's very, very important for us. You highlighted on a number of current issues that are delving us as Africans, but also Africans in the diaspora, in terms of us still fighting and still confronting injuries such as violence, such as racism, and also you actually say that it's time for us to reclaim our space together and our future together. And the question, and the big question you posed there, is the whole issue of economics, of the systems, the structures that still continue to keep us entangled in poverty. You highlighted on how we're actually seeing this in these COVID-19 times, where many countries are struggling to provide services or basic services to their citizens. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Angelique. We would move on now to the next presenter, who is Ms. Ayman Khairi. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Ms. Ayman Khairi serves as the head of the Diaspora Division in the African Union Commission. And this is located in the chairperson's office of the Commission. Ms. Ayman navigates African diaspora for development discourse by focusing on the riches that the diaspora offer in the political, social, and economic spaces in both countries of origin and in their countries of destination. She provides advice and support to the African Union and AU member states on the effective diaspora engagement. She works to establish the 6th region of Africa, which is its diaspora, by establishing, enabling, and growing a network of diaspora partnerships which are capable of effecting change on the continent. With regards to her education, she organized a continental forum on the role of the diaspora in higher education in 2019, which brought together higher educational institutions and academics from Africa and the diaspora to deliberate on higher education, research, and innovation in Africa. So she's working to conjure diasporans and people on the African continent to actually look at how education can be revamped, or how both the people in the diaspora and the people on the continent can work together for a better education, an education that can make us a better people, or that can help us to reach the goals that we aspire as Africans and Africans in the diaspora. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Ayman Khairi is a founder of the Interfaith Dialogue on Violent Extremism, in short known as IDOV, in the African Union, which is a program that utilizes the power of dialogue, youth, and creativity in preventing violent extremism. Ms. Khairi comes with over 10 years of experience working with various UN institutions and peacekeeping operations in electoral assistance, conflict resolution, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, research, and international development. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give this time to Ms. Ayman Khairi. Ms. Ayman Khairi, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for the kind words. And thank you everyone who's here. I'm honored to be part of the African and the African Diaspora Conference. And of course, the gratitude and thanks extends to everyone who was partnering and working for this great event. My 15 minutes, I'll spend my 15 minutes speaking about 4 issues. The first is speaking about the history of the African Union vis-a-vis the diaspora. The second speaks about the definition of the diaspora. The third about the diaspora program. And based on the focus of this conference, I'll speak about people of African descent and our work with that. So the diaspora agenda of the African Union found itself during the transformation of the OAU, or the Organization of the African Unity, to the African Union. If you remember, the Organization of the African Unity or the OAU. It started in 1963 with the heads of state having a dream of political independence and fighting apartheid. Fast forward almost 40 years or 37 years later, in the year 2000, when the heads of state were starting to speak about Africa, even though it has majority of the countries had gained independence by then, they did not see the Africa they wanted. So some of the things that, like that was mentioned was that the social and economic development was not up to par. At that time, in the year 2000, you would remember that there were a lot of internal conflicts within Africa. So they realized that they needed a different union, an African Union that now has a constitutive act that speaks about development, peace, and security. But there was another thing. The OAU was government centric, and they realized that now, as they speak about an agenda that speaks about development, about peace, about security, this isn't something that heads of state or governments can do alone. It requires mobilization of everyone in the continent, all African citizenry. Hence why the Constitutive Act speaks about a people-centered and people-driven organization. Actually, specifically, it says to create partnerships between the government and all segments of African citizenry. This includes faith-based organizations, like a lot who are here with us today, but also civil society, trade unions, and others. After adopting the Constitutive Act, what happened is they realized that there was a large segment of African citizenry that were living outside Africa, the diaspora. And that's why in 2001, there was an amendment, this protocol of amendment to the Constitutive Act that encourages and invites the participation of the African diaspora in the African Union. And that basically created the start of this specific engagement with the African diasporas. The question now came to speak about who are the African diaspora that we need to engage. And the definition of the African diaspora, after various consultations with the Executive Council, with heads of state, with the diaspora members themselves, came into three parts. The first part is that they had to be African. And by that, they had to be African of the blood or African of the soil. And that was important because it included people of African descent. You had to mention people who left the continent voluntarily, but those who were forced to leave the continent. The second part that was important was the geographic aspect. And here, because African Union is continental, we look at the diaspora as people who live outside this African continent. So that was the second aspect. The third aspect, and that was the aspect that actually took quite a long time to get an agreement on, is the reciprocity aspect. You have as a diaspora to want to be part of the African diaspora. And to ensure this, they speak about the reciprocity aspect. You need to want to support the development of Africa. So the definition of the African diaspora is people of African origin living outside the continent who, irrespective of their current citizenship or nationality, are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. It is a long definition, like I always say, it's a mouthful, but it's really a definition that captures a lot of people of African descent and a lot of Africans who are living outside the continent. Now, the diaspora program started before, we basically was set in stone in 2012, when we had the Global African Diaspora Summit that took place in Midrand, South Africa. But leading to that, there were a lot of events that shaped this diaspora program. Basically because we had consultations, regional consultative consultations that took place in the different regions in the world. We divide the world into three regions. We have Americas and the Caribbean, Europe, and the Middle East, Asia, and Oceania. It was important to do this regional approach, or to venture with this regional approach, because every region has a specificity. The diasporas that are there are not similar to diasporas that are found in the Caribbean are not similar to those found in Europe, are not similar to those in Asia. The roots, the reasons, and the current political situation and economic situation is not the same. So this regional consultative conference created sort of a foundation of how we would like to engage the diaspora. But the engagement again, or the diaspora program, found itself in the Global African Diaspora Summit that took place in 2012. It was a big summit that had around 89 heads of state and government. Majority of who were not from Africa came from the Caribbean. And if you look at the Global African Diaspora Summit, and you'll find it online with all the different languages, the AU languages, you'll find that it focuses on three main areas. First, it has a political declaration, which is to ensure the political will. The second thing it has is it speaks about a program of action. This program of action is divided into social, economic, and political spheres. The third thing it clearly speaks about are legacy projects. And these are projects that basically give practical meaning to what it means to engage the African diaspora. Some of these legacy projects, if you would remember them, the majority which were economic at the time were the African Diaspora Investment Fund, the African Institute of Remittance, the Diaspora Marketplace, the Diaspora Database, and the Diaspora Volunteer Corps. All of these projects, with the exception of the database, which we have engaged in various aspects, have come to light. So now I'd like to speak about how is it that we engage with the diaspora, or what do we do with the diaspora program? So the first thing, and I think Gordon mentioned it in the introduction, is that we support member states. African member states who'd like to engage the diaspora. Part of what we do in my division is we build capacities of member states. We do this through a tool that we have called the Diaspora Engagement Self-Assessment Tool. Basically a tool that member states can fill. And once they fill this tool, it allows us to understand where the strengths are of these member states and which are the areas that can benefit from some capacity building. So it becomes very tailor-made. Usually we focus on a country by country, but also recently, if we find 3 or 4 countries that have the same challenge or gap, then there's a lot of benefit in bringing these countries together, because there's also the cross-learning environment that happens. We also support diasporas abroad, and we do this by supporting what we call diaspora networks. So we don't look at diaspora organizations, we look at diaspora networks because we believe in the power of network. This power of network, you can see it in, first, instead of having these professional associations, gather together, you have the different sects of the African diaspora, the skilled, the low skilled, the professional, the national, the religious. So it allows you as a network to have a strength of understanding the situation of all African diasporas, not diasporas that are within your network. That's the first thing. The second thing, as a network, you are able to engage with the country in which you are residing in a much powerful way and a much more organized way. And the third thing is that it provides better engagement with the African Union. And remember, we speak about the 6th region of Africa. And for the 6th region, there were decisions by the Executive Council, which is the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, and the Assembly, which is the heads of state, where they spoke about the 6th region that needs to be represented through these networks. So the idea is to have elections, and these elections between the different regions that we have abroad, and have a member or a network of the diaspora representing all diasporas worldwide to attend the African Union assemblies and summits, and then represent that voice of the African diaspora. And then, of course, we engage in diaspora for development projects. These vary from year to year. During COVID, I'll speak about 2. One, we had a few webinars with health professionals, and we supported health professionals to engage with Africa Center of Disease Control, Africa CDC, where they provided their expertise in specific technical working groups. So that was a knowledge exchange that took place there. The second thing is to support, we know that COVID is a health pandemic, but it has the economic reach that it has is massive. So to support the micro, small, and medium enterprises, we are providing different simulations using innovation, of course, simulation of the different policies that might be applied by African states to understand how these micro, small, and medium enterprises and informal sector, I have to add, informal sector would behave to these policies in a risk-free environment. It allows us to better guide these MSMEs, but also allows us to create better effective policies. I'll speak now about people of African descent. So our engagement with them has been specifically targeting people of African descent in 3 parts. The first part is, we spoke about networks. So the Caribbean actually was the first region that created their own network. It is called the Caribbean Pan-African Network. This network existed with the existence of the diaspora agenda. They've been very active in speaking about a lot of their issues in the Caribbean. one of the things that they succeeded in doing is that the African Union, and that's the second point that we do, attends the Emancipation Day, the Caribbean Emancipation Day on the 1st of August every year. Of course, there's an exception to this year, 2020. But this attendance by the highest leadership of the African Union shows the Caribbean community that there is this continuous support and this political will to continue supporting the region of the Caribbean, people of African descent. Part of what has been an outcome of this is that this year, but again, because of COVID has been postponed, was meant to have a summit between CARICOM and the African Union. That is also, by the way, a recommendation of the Global African Diaspora Summit. You'll find it in the political sphere. And finally, one of the things that we've been engaging with since 2017 is the Decade for People of African Descent. It's the UN decade that was announced between 2015 to 2024, and it has three main pillars: recognition, justice, and development. We as African Union took lead on the continent. So what we did is, first, we held a consultation where we brought various networks that we engage with, member states that engage in this matter. The first meeting took place in Ghana, and the UN, the different UN agencies and human rights agencies that belong to the African Union. And what we had is the first consultation and a plan of action. We then went to Senegal, where we had the second conference, and that brought a lot of the member states, African Union member states, because we were providing a midterm review that we wanted to submit to the UN to speak about their implementation, the midterm review and their implementation of the Decade for People of African Descent. Because when we speak about African descent, the onus is on us, on African countries and on the African Union to do that. I have to say that during these meetings, it was a two-part meeting. So part of it was a meeting where we spoke theoretically or we spoke intellectually about what we would do and what we can do. But the second part of the meeting was a field visit. So when we went to Ghana, we went to Elmina Castle in Cape Coast. And we went to Senegal, we went to Gorée Island and to the slave castle. And we did that, or the slave house. We did that because this aspect is not just a theoretical or intellectual aspect, but there is an emotional aspect to it that needs to be ignited. When we speak about the history of people of African descent, or we speak about slavery, it is one of the most grave episodes that took place in humanity. And we need to remember this, and we need to have that passion when we engage on these topics. I'll stop here because I think that we need to give, I'm looking forward to the Q&A that would take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ayman, for your presentation. We deeply, deeply appreciate that you could take this time to be with us today. Very, very important. What you said in your last words there, it's very, very important, I think, to me, but also to us all, where you actually say that what we are discussing and what we are meeting here to do today is not just a theoretical, intellectual exercise. You say that there is an emotional part to it. There is this emotional aspect. And the best that we can do through this consultation is also to begin to ignite that passion. You say that we need to connect our emotional aspects to the things that we are talking about. And we are hoping that by going through this consultation and the discussions that we are having now, we would be able to connect and reconnect. And I think part of what you do here when you go on the visits on the ground and visit some of these very important icons and places and spaces where certain events have happened actually is very, very important. We really appreciate your presentation in terms of helping us to understand how the African in the diaspora is defined at the present moment and the consultation processes that went through, that Africa went through, including Africans in the diaspora, trying to understand how can we define an African diaspora, the Global African Diaspora Conference and the political declaration that is there in the program of action And the projects that the African Union is implementing, I think it's very, very important. It's in a way trying our level best to connect ourselves as both Africans on the continent and Africans on the diaspora. So we deeply, deeply, deeply appreciate. May I also say to participants, I would just repeat again that can we engage using the chat box if you have any questions, any reflections that come to mind. There is a question and a Q&A section, and you can also write in the chat box in terms of what reflections, what questions you might have. We would have an opportunity to visit some of those towards the end in a plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, we would move ahead with the program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Bani Pichana, who would be our next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Bani Pichana is a human rights lawyer, and he is also a theologian. He attended the University of Fort Hare. He was one of the founding members of the South African Students' Organization of the Black Consciousness Movement with Steve Biko and others. Professor Bani was also a member of the African National Congress Youth League then, and was suspended for challenging the authority of the Afrikaans teachers and the apartheid principles of Bantu education. Professor Pichana received a degree from the University of South Africa in 1976, but it's important to say that he was barred from practicing law in Port Elizabeth by the apartheid government. He was also banned by the apartheid government from public activity then. While in exile in 1978, he studied theology at King's College in London. Thereafter, he served as an Anglican curate in Milton Keynes and as a vicar in Birmingham. From 1988 to 1992, Professor Bani was director of the program to combat racism at the World Council of Churches in Geneva. He then returned to South Africa in 1993, following the end of apartheid. He continued working in theology and also in human rights, completing a PhD in religious studies at the University of Cape Town in 1995. Professor Pichana was appointed a member of the South African Human Rights Commission in 1995 and served as chairman of the commission from 1995 to 2001. He also served on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in 1997, now the AU. Professor Pichana became Vice Chancellor and Principal for the University of South Africa in 2001, a position he held for 9 years. He was the rector of the College of Transfiguration Anglican in Grahamstown from 2011 until 2014. He is the president of the Convocation of the University of Cape Town. And I must also say that Professor Pichana's work in human rights has been widely recognized to the extent that in December 2002, he was awarded an honorable mention of the 2002 UNESCO Prize for Human Rights Education. Professor Pichana, I would give the floor to you. You have 25 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for that rather detailed and comprehensive introduction. Much appreciated. Thank you also, especially the leadership group of the AAD for the invitation to make a presentation at this Africa Conference of Africans, Pan-Africanism and Africans in the Diaspora. I've done a discussion document on Pan-Africanism after 1945. In that, I have raised some of the challenges that we as Africans face today. And for that, I thank my good friends, the Reverend Dr. Frank Chikane and the Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith, first for recommending me that I should do this, but also for engaging with me as the document was progressing over time. It is a discussion document which really raises issues. But the immediate response I had from Frank Chikane is the basis of my contribution today. Frank's response to the discussion paper was a very telling and important one. Because it says, you know, the issues that you raise here, we ordinary Africans can do very little or nothing about. What is it that we can actually do? What is it that we can engage? How can we do something to change the nature of relationships and strengthen the coverage and the being of Pan-Africanism in Africa and in the diaspora? And I want to spend a little bit of time in conversation about that today. As you have heard, my association, my involvement rather, in Africa has been around the human rights issues, constitutionalism, good governance, and accountability. Have been many of the issues that I have been very intricately involved with. But I've also been involved with ASRIC, the African Science, Research and Innovation Council, the work that the African Union has put together scientists from all disciplines to really undertake research and innovation and get into the heart of what are the issues that Africa is grappling with and how we can find solutions together. I've also been involved in the African Council for Distance Education in order to see how best we can utilize e-learning in Africa and technology to enable ordinary people to continue their lifelong learning as Africans. It is out of those three things that I want to proffer some direction as to where I think we should go. But before I do that, let me say one of two things about we Africans. There is a dilemma. Very often, we Africans tend to express our Africanness almost universally about those things that are grim and wrong and what needs to be put right about Africa and about the continent, where we lag in terms of development, in terms of productivity, in agriculture, in science, in knowledge generation. We tend to compare ourselves very, very often with many other countries and states that, in fact, we find it very difficult to be comparable with. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, because after all, we live in a very interconnected world. In reality, it is very difficult for us to be Africans without being part of a world that is interconnected. The second thing that we tend to do, if we don't do that, then we tend to be, if you like, visionaries in a philosophical sense, where we talk about Pan-Africanisms, almost what should be, but it is not. Those things that actually inspire us, as we heard this morning, the inspiring address from the Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. those things that really inspire us very often, the things that inspire us are the things of the past and where we have been, what we have achieved, and the pride that we should have as people of Africa and as people of African descent. So philosophically, we feel a lot more comfortable and coherent when we talk about the times of glory and success and pride that we duly should have as Africans. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, because one of the things that this program, AAD, is doing to us, it's helping us to recapture our humanity, our dignity as a people of Africa. A humanity and dignity that we do not owe to anybody. We're not human because somebody else has actually made it so. Thirdly, I think that we are inclined, and with some justification, to be very, very focused on the deficits that we suffer. For example, Black Lives Matter, the scourge of racism. It's amazing. A gentleman called Donald Trump is awaiting the results of the elections of the United States to have another term as president. It's not without significance that Mr. Trump quoted what Nigerians, I don't know who these Nigerians are, had said about how much they were hoping that he would be the winner in the elections in the United States yesterday. So for him, somehow, that was important enough to tweet about or to tell the world that Africans are supporting him. Even to the point of saying that since Abraham Lincoln, no other president has ever supported African-American citizens of the United States as he has been. That's a matter for debate. I can't judge that. I don't know. But the point I'm making is that we get caught very, very often in this state of deficit, whether it's racism or other. We're not mentioning sufficiently, I think, those issues. I tell people very often, if you look at the football team in France, the national football team in France, almost every one of the members of those teams, bar 2 or 3, are Africans. Almost all of them are African professional footballers who have been in France last few years, maybe, as professional football players. It's something that if France is playing, for example, what shall I say, against England, you almost instinctively feel an urge to support France, because the person you see there is a person who rather looks like you. So while Black Lives Matter is important, while the struggle against racism is absolutely important, but I wish that we could raise those same issues in a very different way. We raise them by simply asserting the dignity and the humanity of the people of Africa, and assume that the Black Lives Matter, they matter not because certain people make it possible or make it matter. They matter because it is the purpose of God in creation that we should be fully human. So I start by sketching those 3 positions that we as Africans have to always contend with and see where exactly we fit our movement and our activism about Africa today. Let me just say also the point that Reverend Chikani was making with me is that particularly as Africans, we emphasize what Africans governments do or do not do. We emphasize the problems we have with African governments, whether it's corruption, whether it's war or conflict, or whether it's human rights violations. What African governments do is something that, as we should, we emphasize a lot. What Reverend Chikane was saying to me, that there are certain things that African governments can and should and must do. But there are other things that the citizens of Africa must actually learn to take responsibility for. In other words, at the end of the day, the future of Africa is not going to be determined entirely by what the governments of Africa do. There is a whole dimension of civil society. There's a dimension, a religious and spiritual dimension of churches and people of all faiths and religions who are making a very important contribution in the making of Africa day by day. And they too need to be challenged about what their role is in the making and the development of Africa. The other one is the dimension, for example, of sport. COSAFA and places like those. Very, very often these two things don't seem to hang together. The people who are engaged in sport across Africa, whether it's Olympic sports, it's athletics, it's football, it's cricket, it's rugby, there is something of excellence that we find in African sport that we are not celebrating sufficiently enough, or we are not utilizing as an important dimension of the African persona. So we can go from the third one, I think I mentioned earlier on, the area that I'm involved in, is the whole area of science and research and innovation and development. Because in reality, the people of Africa are going to have to engage with one another in order to address the challenges and the problems that Africa faces and find solutions for those problems. So when the African scientific community, the Association of African Universities, ASRIC, NASAC, and the academies of science in Africa, all of these are very, very important agencies for change and transformation in Africa. That somehow, when we meet together in this way, they meet in their own different places. I'd like to see a venue, a forum that brings Africans from all dimensions somehow to begin to talk together and indeed to speak as one. So that scholars and scientists and researchers and those involved in innovation, whatever it is that they are doing and engaged in, impacts on education in Africa, on sciences, on solutions that are to be found in the science programs that we're dealing with, are contributing to the challenges of development in Africa and Africa as a whole. And the importance, I think, of the Africans and the struggles of the Africans in the diaspora is precisely that all-inclusive vision that Manchester had of Africa as completely free of any influences and occasions for undermining the African personality. Now, to the question that was raised for me then, I think that and this must be the beginning of a movement for Africa, because after all, Pan-Africanism was a movement of African peoples everywhere. So if you can recapture that mood of a movement of African peoples and Pan-Africans who together are bounded together in this idea of what Africa is. And I was very glad, Gordon, when you, it was Ayman Khair who said that in defining who is an African, it's very important that we don't necessarily limit our definition to just a person who can trace his roots to Africa. Or it is very, very important to really to understand that there is a Pan-Africanism of the heart, that certain of us, I'm thinking, for example, of Frantz Fanon, an African of the heart who really was passionate about what Africa is. And if we are passionate about what Africa is, we are also moved to be the means for change and correction, but also the means for envisioning and imagining a new Africa in a very new way, in a new world. It is very, very interesting that both you, Gordon, and Ayman Khair, it's very important for me to recognize that there was a small window in the life of the Continental Union, whether as the OAU or as the AU. I think there was a small window that gave birth to African Renaissance and the African Union. It was a small window where Africa, as Africans, we were riding the wave, and we were proud to be Africans. We were speaking and arguing and enabling, precisely because we had a commitment to the future of Africa. And everything we did, what we slept and what we woke up, what we dreamt, everything that we did was about Africa. When we begin to do that, then other nations and other worlds take notice. And they begin to realize that when Africans actually express their dreams about Africa, they come from deep down. And their dreams about what Africa is destined to become. And if it is destined to become what it should be, then it means that we make a commitment now to work towards that destination. We can't dream and then sit and do nothing. We've got to be involved in the handiwork of creating that which is our imagination about Africa. So I think that, Dr. Chikane, I think that this project that we are doing is in reality a whole movement that brings all Africa together, all Africa in the diaspora together, so that together we can actually work towards a common and a shared future. I do not deny that that has to begin with an African Union, that we're very proud of, with an African Union that stands proud in the councils of the world. It must begin with an African Union that facilitates and enables, so that we don't get to a situation where African Union can become the Council of African Leaders and politicians that goes begging to European and American nations and for China, so that we can become an Africa that doesn't depend on China to even build our own African Union headquarters, for example. We shouldn't be in a situation where young Africans risk everything.
I would ask you to wind up in 3 minutes. Thank you. Just continue.
Give me 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Just 1 minute.
Okay.
We should not be an Africa which our young people are continuing today to be involved and victims of human trafficking. So I come to the point that I started with and saying that what we are doing now is the beginning of a movement of the peoples of Africa for the betterment of Africa. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Thank you so much, Professor Pichkana, and thank you so much for your wisdom. I would also start from where you actually ended. I mean, with the need to build a movement and the need to root this process of ADD into the people. So the people actually matter here, be it even in the African Union, kind of like coming together of the governments and the projects that they are doing within Agenda 2063. I think you are saying that people are very, very important because they have to be part and parcel of it. You're talking about the need to begin to have this movement of African people and Pan-Africans on this idea of what we see as the Africa that we want. And I also liked when you mentioned the fact that Pan-Africanism could also extend to other people that might have Pan-Africanism at heart or Pan-Africanism of the heart, which you mentioned there, kind of like looking at, how we can broaden our understanding and how we can build this movement in terms of those that we can work with, those that we can rely on, or those that we can hold hands with, these people that are Pan-Africanism at heart. It's very, very important. And in this, you were talking about the need for Africans really to converge together in different disciplines, or those that are working in different thematic areas, be they faith-based organizations, civil society organizations, to enable them to think together and work together for the development of Africa. For me, was very, very important. I think you mentioned this whole issue about what we are talking about today. I mean, going forward, we need to understand that it is about the dignity and humanity of people of Africa. And you mentioned it right there, that this is the purpose of God in creation, that we all should have this dignity and humanity. And this is part of the approach that we can actually take to this discourse and dialogue. I think you also cataloged some of the things that are very, very important, which motivates us. I mean, kind of like helps to elevate us to move from where we are, where you were talking about some of the deficits that we as Africans and Africans in the diaspora suffer from. So we really thank you so much for this presentation. And I mean, your experience, having worked both in South Africa historically, but also continuing to work in this very present day in South Africa for human rights. I think it is very, very important, and we have really gained quite a lot in terms of the things that we should take forward. Some of them, the fundamental values that would make us break or make it if we need to move forward. So thank you so much. We would move forward now to the next presenter. And I would ask again for participants to use the chat box. I would also emphasize now, before I introduce the next presenter, Dr. Pierre, that if you can stick to the time allocation, would be very, very important. I know you have spent quite a lot of time preparing for this, and I see on the program that you are allocated 5 minutes only. It is just my plea that you would stick to the 5 minutes allocated. You can just lift out the nuggets from your presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Dr. Pierre Idim is a Beninese national. He holds a PhD, doctorate degree in international relations from the Faculty of Law, Abdel Malek Essad University in Morocco. Since 2015, he has been a professor of international relations and international cooperation at the University of Tangier in Morocco and at the Higher School of Business and Management of Tangier. He is also an associate researcher at the Research Center think tank Civic Academy for Africa's Future, based in Cotonou, Benin. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Pierre is the author of several scientific articles as well as collective works, including his last 2 publications that are available on the internet. We can share with you the links if you would be interested. At the level of his church, which is the Église Évangélique au Maroc, EEAM, he is very involved in various responsibilities. Between 2010 and 2012, a parish assistant of the Church of Tangier, and since 2013, he has been the president of the Council of the Church. Since 2015, he has been vice president of the National Committee of the EEAM. He is also the Secretary General of the University Biblical Group of Morocco. He represented his church in several international conferences across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Pierre. Dr. Pierre, you have 5 minutes, and your 5 minutes starts right now.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tout le monde. Et je voudrais saluer.
Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to greet all the organizers of this conference in this moment of discussion and exchanges. The topic that we are discussing now, the topic on which we are thinking now, it's a very important topic, but at the same time,
Dr. Pierre, I hope all participants realize that if you are English speaking now, you need interpretation. So you go to the bottom of the screen, you see where it says interpretation, click there and then click English. You would hear the interpretation coming through. Thank you. Sorry to disturb your flow.
Okay, merci. Donc je continue.
Thank you. So I continue. Our topic is very important. And since I have only 5 minutes, I will go straight to the session. We have heard other presenters who spoke about some topics, some very important points in relation to the problematics on the topic which is gathering us today. The African diaspora is a very important component on the African continent. In fact, in some years, the financial contribution, the financial part that the diaspora is bringing to the development of Africa is something very significant, very important. And these last years, it even went beyond public aid to development. That means the help provided by international organizations and states bringing to Africa. And for me, I find that component very important. Today, we must have special attention to the African diaspora. You know, since independence, we have heard many speeches for the development of the African continent. International organizations have been created to address the needs of African people. Summits, conferences, etc., were organized so that the objectives of Africa, so that the challenges of Africa may be addressed. But since all those decades, the ambition, the objectives are not yet achieved. Now, after this realization of failure, the continent has to raise. Africa must stop making speeches and start working. It's a work which will liberate this continent. And for me, in addition to the work, the African continent must also align in a perspective of solidarity. Because without African solidarity, it will be impossible for us to reach our objectives. In these last years, Africans have rejoiced because of the construction of the headquarters of the United Africa Union in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And you know, like me, that headquarters is a gift from China to Africa. For me as an African, it's a shame to know that the house, the main house of Africans, which is the house of more than 1 billion people in Africa, is a gift which is granted by China. Africans, are they really unable to build that house, which was less than 100 billion euro? The answer is no. We have today 54 states in Africa, 54 nations. How can we envisage, how can we understand that they were unable to build their own headquarters? The first element, which is necessary to manage, to build a continent, so that the objective on the political aspect, economical, social aspect, we need that solidarity between Africans. So that is very important. The collective synergy, which integrates all the components of the continent, is a determining factor. In addition, since those decades, Africa is in the search of a certain number of solutions. And we observe that the governors, the leaders of the continent, sometimes they are deaf to the aspiration of the people. Another example, which is since 1 year, the whole world is confronted to COVID-19. And Africans are just sitting and they're waiting for Europe, the West, find a vaccine. And we see that we wait as Africans, the solution to our problem coming from outside. This is not possible. We have waited on external solutions for many decades. And now we should also, as Africans, find African solutions to the challenges and problems that Africans are facing. It's very important. We cannot expect solutions to our problems come dictated, elaborated by other powers, by our other states, which don't have the same perspective, which don't have the same agenda, which don't have the same understanding of the challenges that we are facing. So we must raise and favor, exploit what we have as resources, as culture, to value what we have as potential. Africa is very rich, and we have to trust ourselves and rely on what we have as potential to launch the development of the continent. So my time is very short. So in order to respect, I hope in 10 years or 20 years when we meet again, we shall be able to make an assessment, satisfying assessment, and prove that the African continent will achieve its objectives in the future. This is my prayer, this is my wish for this continent that we love so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And thank you so much for your aspirations there and the challenges that you pose to us in terms of how we should build this movement, but also in terms of how Africa and Africans in the diaspora must move forward. You highlighted a very important facet on African solidarity, which is very, very important. But also, I think in terms of African dignity, you actually mentioned that we should, as Africa, be proud of the things that we do on our own. You kind of like highlighted there in terms of the need for us to have a common vision and work towards it together. You were talking about the gift that gifts that we can receive from other countries. where we actually have a possibility for us to work up on ourselves, and that we should, as much as possible, try to take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and just work towards what we want to achieve. You also mentioned there towards the end that we should also be looking at African solutions that are coming from Africans, and not to look at solutions that could be dictated to Africa from other nations that might have vested interests that might be different from our own interests as Africans and Africans in the diaspora. Thank you so much, Dr. Pierre there. Now we would move on to Monsieur Usman. Ladies and gentlemen, Monsieur Usman is from Gambia. That's where he was born. He grew up as the second child from his family to have received Western education, as his father was already a renowned Islamic scholar. Monsieur Usman started his schooling career in 2003 from Sare Samba Lower Basic School in 2009, then moved to Kaif Upper Basic School. In 2013, he moved to the city in one of the best high schools in the Gambia, Masro Senior School. He finished his high school in 2016 and got enrolled in the University of Gambia in September the same year. In the university, he studied development studies and graduated in 2019.
Sorry,
Monsieur?
The Ms. Usman is not online. Would propose that you go with Lebogang Chaka.
Okay. Okay. So thank you so much. Okay.
Are you there, Gordon? Sorry.
Yes, I'm here. So Miss Ria, Miss Ria Ruhada.
She hasn't joined as well, so we've requested Lebogang Chaka. She's online now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. We would then give this opportunity to Lebogang as one of the respondents to what has been said so far. And I would hand over the time to you. We would give you 5 minutes, and your 5 minutes, Lebogang, starts now. Lebogang?
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to reflect on some of the conversations that have been going on with regards to us really sitting here as Africans and really crafting our future and really determining our future. I've been playing mainly the role of just, looking through the proceedings of the conference. So really from Reverend Chikana, one of the most important things that I think I love the way he set the context in terms of us really going back to the 1955 Pan-African Conference and in Manchester, and really saying that as Africans, there were three main things that were highlighted from the political side of our continent, to the economic part of our continent, to the spiritual part or the social part, as we may say, in our continent. And it poses a lot of questions to us as Africans to say, what then do we want to see in our continent going forward? And it's lovely to see a movement like this where there's clearly a social, spiritual side that comes through. I can see they're saying that I don't have sound, but on my side, I see someone saying that I don't have sound. Is it okay? Can everybody hear me? I saw something coming through. Gordon, can you confirm?
We can hear you, confirmed. Just go ahead.
Okay, I saw something in the chat box that said she's muted. Okay, so it's really interesting to see that we are actually, as this platform, carrying through the mandate of the 1955 conference, where it's anchored really, being started by Reverend Chikana and what he stands for from a social perspective, but really being able to marry the political and economic side of things. When I looked at Dr. Angelique Walker and what she was talking about in terms of the diaspora, it's very important, I think, that we really look at our diaspora as a really intricate part of taking the continent further, because the economic part of the continent is very much tied to what the diaspora can do in terms of, going abroad and what they're able to bring into the continent. And I'm reminded of my own story when I went to go study in Australia, and my parents said, go to the West, get the intelligence and see which part of that intelligence you can then bring back to your home ground and help people. So it is for us to then look at the diaspora and say, what are some of the best practices that we can get out there and bring them back and create that, economic stability for Africans, because a lot of this economic instability then leads to political instability, because then people see political power as a means to resource, as opposed to then serving Africans and making the landscape better. And looking at what Ms. Elamia Kerr was talking about, and I was quite impressed by how she mentioned the practical part of, being on the ground and, traveling to all these different African countries to be able to come up with solutions that are practical and that are on the ground. And I think it's for us sitting in these kind of conversations to say, are we really looking at this from a theoretical point of view, or are we on the ground with the people and really understanding the issues that are happening? So it's then to say, in 2022, as much as we're saying that we are going to have a conference, how then do we then also look at different tours around the continent, so that when we come back and solution, it's actual, solutions on the ground. And then when I was very inspired by Dr. Pijana, who, I have utmost respect for, and some of the work that they did in the Black consciousness movement, and really how he then talks about how, we need to investigate African solution problems and then find our own solutions. And I think that then becomes the central theme to say, when we look at race in the continent, what does it really mean? And how then do we take our consciousness? How do we take that and, look at some of the struggles that we had around racism, and then take the real African child forward in the continent? And it's really saying, let us be centered in our consciousness around that, and looking at these different solutions in terms of, whether it's science, research, or innovation, and looking at what Dr. Ademi was saying, that which is very inspirational also, where he, there's a clear, theme that cuts across with all the speakers, where they're saying, us as Africans, let us solution, let us be proactive, and let us look at what we as Africans can do, and rather move from our place of complacency and, take our power back. So for me, those are some of the observations and some of the themes that are coming through as we go through the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo-Han. Well captured. You have been listening very, very well. And I was really touched about when you went to Australia, there's an opportunity there to kind of ingrain. We can actually go interact, but also we can learn a lot in terms of what we can bring back and plow back into our own constituencies. So thank you so much. Now I would like us to kind of do some question and answer session, which is the next on the program. And I'm kind of looking and watching time now that we only have 15 minutes. And so I am just going to pick a few questions from the question and answer session of the chat box, which you can actually access here. And some of the questions I would pose them maybe generally to the panel, but also some of them I would just ask specific panelists to respond to them. So I would first use the question and answer session, box at the present moment. So the first question that we have here is that, is there any advice that we can get on eradication of corruption? This has a negative impact on African growth. So this question on corruption, maybe I can address it to Dr. Pierre, if you can take note of this question. The next one says, good morning, everyone. I'm curious about the organizing structures that undergirds this initiative. Would you explain the outreach processes, structures that exist or that will be created to enable issue-specific participation? Are you envisioning thematic working groups? Is there a secretariat responsible for holding the various threads together? Thank you for leading this effort. Reverend Frank Chikane, would you be kind to respond to this question, possibly Reverend Angelique as well? And maybe I can just add a question to this, Reverend Chikane, what you would like to see as the key takeaways from October 2021 consultation. If it would be successful, what would it have achieved? The next one says, a massive thanks to the ancestors who have gone before us for giving effect to the spirit messages from the great Reverend Dr. Frank Chikane, who prefaced his message from the ancestral legend. I can't pronounce correctly the name there. We venerate Reverend Dr. Angelique for her thought-provocation message that we need to know the meaning of what it means to have gone through the colonial slavery system. This is so powerful because many of us are already on the ground on the metaphysics of these experiences. So this is, I think this is an appreciation and also some insights in terms of how we can move together. Ayman, I would ask, this one says, is protocol not hindrance to your objectives? So this comes from Sandikazi. The next one is good too and glad to be here. One of the critical issues, especially as young Pan-Africanists, is to recapture the memory of African history struggles and make it part of our own struggle and aspirations. I'm here to affirm that I am African by birth, by blood, by aspiration. Good to see my good friend. Oh, sorry. The next one is, I perceive regulation and innovation as major challenges to African development. How can this be addressed? So Professor Bani, if you can respond to this specific question. What is the one thing or two things this platform would regard as critical and call to Africa? This question comes from South Africa. May I ask Reverend Angelique to take this question for us? And then the last question is, how do we break the Euro, American and Chinese on the African continent? This one comes from James Adams. Professor Pichkana, as you respond, you can also touch on this question. Panelists, I would give you this time to respond. I will start with Dr. Pierre, just a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes. Dr. Pierre? Okay, so maybe I can then move on to...
Oui, est-ce que s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous pouvez reprendre ma question? Je n'ai pas bien suivi, s'il vous plaît. La question qui... Oui. Oui.
Okay, so the question that I allocated to you is the first one, which says, can you give us any advice on eradication of corruption since this has a negative impact on African growth?
Effectivement, ça c'est une certitude. L'Afrique s'est distinguée depuis toujours par une mauvaise gouvernance qui se caractérise très fortement par la corruption des élites. C'est une certitude. Maintenant, nous savons qu'il faut y apporter...
Okay. Now we know that we need solutions. What are the solutions? We need to reinforce the institutions of African stations, reinforce the institutions in such a way that the management of public policies should be transparent management. Institutions of law should be clearly defined so that the population may have a look at the management which reflects, which is done by the governors. This is very important. If governors continues in Africa, because the population has nothing to say. Generally, they are behind what the elite is doing in African states. So it is very important that this population should have its word to say. The population should have a look, and the institutions, counter power institutions, states are generally organized around counter power institutions. You have implementation institutions, but counter power institutions. So each of them must play its role, its responsibility. This is very important. If in a state there are no institutions which control the power, then the executive power, which is responsible for management, will have the free hand to go towards corruption, to be deeply corrupted. So it's very important to have transparency at the level of institutions, and the law should be clearly defined, as well as the roles of public actors and political actors to be well defined. So this is a very important condition to reach, to eradicate corruption in the public sphere, in the political management in our countries. I don't know. Okay, yeah, interpretation is going on.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Pierre. Very, very important nuggets that you're giving to us there in terms of how we can work around corruption. We know that it's a big issue on the African continent, and some of it also fueled maybe by those that are not on the African continent, or those countries that actually do have interests on Africa, including illicit financial flows, maybe by some of the transnational corporations. But thank you so much that we should be working on policies, laws and institutions, and our political aspects must be well defined. And this way this can help to eradicate corruption. Ms. Ayman, I would ask you to take the question allocated to you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. The question was about protocol hindrance, but I'm not quite sure I understand the question, to be honest. But I'll just take a chance to say, but if there are so many laws that are not adopted, or like mechanisms that are put forward and adopted in AU summits and executive council, but if that is the question, then I think that the protocol is not a hindrance, because usually we develop or we issue these regulations, but the protocol never really comes into force. So if that was the question, if this is what the question was about, then the protocol is always an advantage, but the protocols of the African Union never come into force. Maybe the good example we had, a recent good example, is the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, where it came into force last year, but most of the protocols of the African Union, and this is where citizenry are required, do not come into force because there is no ratification for it. I hope I answered the question, because it wasn't clear to me what they meant by protocol. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Ayman. Yes, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much in terms of explaining how protocol works in AU. I was wondering if the person was also kind of like thinking about bureaucracy, but yes, the question came through as protocol. So thank you so much for that response. Now we would ask Professor Bani to respond to the questions allocated to him. I think there were two. Professor, we would give you this time.
Thank you very much for those questions, and indeed thank you for the discussion on all the questions that we've heard so far. To tell the truth, Gordon, I'm not even sure that I captured all the questions you referred to me properly. But let me say, which I think may well answer them or skirt around the questions. I think the fundamental thing that we Africans need to realize is that we are not a poor continent. We are not a poor people. We've got land, we've got seas, we've got skies, we've got minerals of every kind that the whole world needs. So the idea of Africa as a basket case doesn't represent Africa in reality. And therefore, it is up to us to engage in trade and relations in a globalized world as equals, not as supplicants, not as people who are begging, but as people who stand tall because our motherland has given us everything that we need and everything that the world needs. What we need to do, though, is to be better organized than we currently are, more psychologically assertive and affirming in the councils of the world. And finally, we need to learn to love one another and respect each other so that we can trade among ourselves as equals. We can communicate, and communication systems across Africa needs a wholesale improvement. And we can actually begin as Africa. It has to start with us as Africa to be prepared to say that because we've got all this wealth, we must trade with one another in a respectable manner. We haven't done that yet. It is amazing how much trade happens between West African countries with European countries, Southern African countries with European countries. Very little intra-African trade is taking place. So what Iman here referred to is important, that the African free trade area that has been created is created. It must not be just an ivory tower. It's created so that we can increase trade and communication and travel. If we can increase the capacity for travel among Africans ourselves, then I think we can face the world with a lot more dignity and pride than we do today. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor. It's very, very important what you have said, especially now with the launch of this year of the African Free Continental Trade Area. And there is enthusiasm, but there is also a kind of like, let's wait and see. We hope and we think that it would work. There have been issues kind of like raised by other countries in terms of their preparedness to kind of like trade already within the African Free Continental Trade Area. But I think it's really one of the major projects of the African Union, and we hope that it would stand to the challenge. Now I would move on to Reverend Angelique. If you got the question that I posed to you, this one came from, it came from South Africa as well. The question is, what is the one or two things this platform would regard as critical or a call for Africa? Reverend Angelique, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you so much, Brother Samango. We're so honored to be with this company today. I think that the movement of AAD is just so exciting because it gives us another opportunity to not only look at these very important substantive themes, but also to look at the ways in which we practically engage this agenda. I believe our sister earlier made mention of this, that this is very much a movement on the ground and in the regions of the world in terms of the diaspora, as well as on the continent. and that each of these regions have their own particular ways of thinking about how it is and praying about how they go to the next steps. And so what the Manchester AAD movement allows for is the space, hospitable space, to affirm the diversities within our fellowship, but also to affirm the unity that brings us together. So I think two critical pieces is hospitality within the fellowship or within the Pan-African space, but also the agency within the larger space to reclaim our narrative, to reclaim our work together, but really sorting out. There has been over 400 years, if, for example, in the United States with the Quadcentennial, that has had an impact on how people think about identity, how they speak about practicalities going forward. I mean, right now we're dealing with this election, which is obviously a huge issue, and what that means for people of African descent, not only in the US, but in the world. We've got to really have a new, renewed conversation about what is the specificity of being African at heart wherever we are. And Manchester allows that space for us to rename and reframe the history for going forward. So hospitality, I think, is key, affirming our diversities, but then finding our way forward through unity. And again, the economic is very important, the spiritual is so important, and also assessing what real political gains we've made and what we haven't. We know we still have so much to do on the economic and the spiritual front relative to the work. And then again, that space of hospitality to join into the specificity of where we are located in these days.
Thank you so much, Rev. Yes, yeah, I mean, you are saying it with passion, but also very, very important there, Rev. I was just switching on my video. Very, very important there, Rev, in terms of, I mean, the huge potential there is, I mean, through this AD space, which allows us to, I mean, to affirm our diversity, to work together. I mean, the possibilities for unity to reassess or to assess how far we have come together, issues around the economic challenge that we are facing. I mean, issues around spirituality. So thank you so much for really giving more nuggets in terms of what the space can achieve if we manage to maximize on it together. Reverend Chikane, I would come to the question that was posed here, which I have asked you to respond to, which is, I'm curious about the organizing structures for this initiative. Would you explain the outreach process, structures that exist or that will be created to enable issue-specific participation? Are you envisioning thematic working groups? Is there a secretariat responsible for holding the various threads together? And I've also said that, Rev, you can also take the opportunity to say if the conference next year in October is successful, what would have it achieved? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Given the limitation of time, I'm going to sum up this because we still have a day tomorrow. We're going to have further conversations. Firstly, I would like to say we started with volunteers. We've been talking about this for the last year or 18 months. We started with volunteers, and we are reaching a stage where there are entities and organizations that are putting their weight on this vision. And you can see from the documentation of who is supporting this initiative, who's powering it, and who's now funding it. And we're expecting that will raise more and more resources to be able to do it. We're also creating capacity for the host committee, which is going to host the conference in Johannesburg. We're working on creating capacity in the various regions because all of them must have these types of consultative conferences so that they can come here. We don't want people who come cold to the conference. We want people who have reflected on the issues and come here and put together the ideas, which will lead to the outcome. And I'm going to summarize that as well. When we started, I talked about the concept note. It's in our website. It has been sent to participants. But what we expect is it's what is in that concept note. And there are thematic streams in it, and I won't speak to them. The first is Pan-Africanism with all for all. In this one, I want to say we want to make sure that the women are involved, the youth are involved, the elderly, various religious expressions, minorities, indigenous people. That's really for all. Secondly, decolonizing knowledge. And we're going to debate and talk about it for the next few months. Black Lives Matter globally. We want to mobilize that, building bridges between Africa and people in the diaspora. Fifthly, towards a democratic and equitable international order, which I referred to when we introduced the subject. The sixth is reparatory justice, life and death in Africa and African diaspora. 7, it's economic liberation. And 8th, it's Pan-Africanism and spirituality. And so I would advise that participants and those who are listening go to the website, get the document, and tomorrow we're going to talk about where to from this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rev, for explaining this to us and responding to that question. And I think we also deeply appreciate the work that is already underway in terms of what has been done to date, from the launch of the process early this year to where we are, and the very excellent work that the hosting committee has been doing together with the international leadership team. And also you highlighting on the outcomes of the consultation. It's very, very important. I would, because I'm looking at time now, I'm grateful that you all have, you are still there with us, and we are meant today to be for 2 hours only. And just like Reverend Chikane said, that the consultation continues tomorrow, and we would not want to take long, and so that you would still have the energy or would still have the excitement to join us tomorrow. And we kindly call you on you to join us tomorrow as well, because we would like to conclude this the way we have started it. So I would like once again to now coming to conclude, just to say that most of the kind of like the summary of what has been discussed has been shared in the reflections by Lebohang there, but also just to emphasize the things that were coming out from this last session on the question and answer, that for us as Africa to move forward, this space is very, very important, that we should capitalize on it, because it allows us to affirm our diversity and the unity that we are aiming at, and for us to actually be able to rename and rewrite the history where we have come from, and also the need for us to have love for each other as Africans, in terms of us being able to work together on specific aspects of the work that we are doing. I think Professor Pichana, they mentioned also issues around working together on issues on trade. It's very, very important. It was also emphasized that policies are very, very important, and these policies that are actually transparent, and that Africa needs to build institutions that are transparent. We need to make sure that our laws and institutions are functioning politically as well, since this would help us to eradicate poverty. Now coming to an end, I would like once again to thank all participants today for your very useful insights and very useful comments and inputs. We have not been able to read all the questions or to look at things that were on the chat box, but we would like to assure you that nothing would go unnoticed. Our rapporteuring team and the host and the international leadership team would actually look at all this collection that we have made in the chat box in terms of collecting those to shape the program as we move towards 2020 October. But we would also make sure that some of the issues that you raise here would form part of the key recommendations from the process. And so thank you so much. We deeply appreciate your engagement with us. And for me to conclude, I think I can stop here. And Reverend Chikane, if you have any final words from the international leadership team, I would hand over to you. If not, we would end here. Reverend Chikane.
I don't know where he went, but as international convener, as international convener with my co-convener, Reverend Chikane, we want to thank everyone very much. This has been an amazing launch for all of the consultations that will come. November the 17th, 10:30 to 12 will be the next consultation based in the United States. Thank you so much. And Mr. Samango, thank you for your leadership today. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thanks to everyone. It's been great. We look forward to the next year of consultations and conversations leading up to the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith, and your comments. We really are very thankful that we have done what we did today, and we thank all the people who joined us for this session. We're continuing tomorrow, so the consultation doesn't stop now. And tomorrow at 12 again, we'll be coming together, and we're going to listen to younger people on the African continent about the Africa they want to see. Thank you very much. We are grateful about your participation.